Hey everyone, Dockwell here, and welcome to another one of my Dota 2 hero guides. Today we're going to be taking a look at Luna. So Luna is a carry hero, and she's one of those quintessential fast farmers. You can think of her similar to like a Medusa or a Sven, because they all have abilities that enhance their right click to do spread damage to creeps. So they don't really need to buy Maelstrom or Battle Fury or Radiance or anything like that. At most, Luna would just need Mask of Madness to make sure she can lifesteal from the creeps, because she's often farming stacks, especially ancient stacks. She's very, very good at farming ancient stacks, probably one of the best in the game. And so with her, you just want to transition to the jungle early, farm a lot early, and get one or two items ahead. And if you can get to that point, you can absolutely snowball the game, and you can just absolutely melt buildings. Because when you push the enemy's base, you will just shred through those racks extremely quickly, probably quicker than almost any other hero in the game. But unlike some other carries, Luna's not all about the right click. She actually has magic damage built into her kit as well. So that can be really good for the laning stage and getting aggressive, or mid-game team fights. You can participate with your ultimate as well and do a ton of magic damage and really help your team that way. So yes, you are a very fast farmer and you want to focus on that, but this magic damage element can't be counted out. And so because of that, once you get into that later portion of the game, yes, if you're an item or two ahead, you can just right-click people down and be very good at that. But then late game, like ultra late game, you start to become kind of this mix where you are very good at right-clicking, you can shred buildings, but then you also are very good at doing a ton of magic damage. And even like to some extent, it's kind of a meme build, but people have been playing this hero more and more as a support, just going for Ag's Refresher and focusing on that magic damage. So that kind of tells you how this hero can kind of be a mix of both and isn't really just all in on one style of play. And so that can make her pretty dangerous, but also pretty unique in those later portions of the game. But before we can understand how to play Luna, we have to take a look at her abilities. Luna's facets are pretty straightforward. She has Moon Shield, which is a defensive facet that gives her damage reduction whenever she casts a lunar orbit, and then Moon Storm, which gives her extra damage whenever she hits enemies with Lucent Beam or Eclipse. And we'll take a look at all those abilities in a second, but it's pretty straightforward. She has the defensive facet and the aggressive damage dealing facet. And then her passive is Lunar Blessing. And this used to be a regular ability that you put points into, and now it's just passive, and she gets attack damage. Her allies also get some attack damage, and she gets night vision. And this increases with every level. So you can see how this is good for her to get ahead in levels and farm to just do more damage overall, have more night vision, all those kinds of things, and also help her team out in team fights when she balls up and stuff like that. So those are her facets and her passive. Now let's jump in and take a look at her abilities. So now let's take a look at Luna's abilities. So first she has Lucent Beam. This is pretty straightforward. You really just click it on an enemy or a creep, and then they get stunned and they take some damage. This can be good later in the game for harassing enemies, or even in the laning stage, or for canceling TPs. Pretty straightforward ability there. Then we have Lunar Orbit, and you pretty much just press this ability, and then you have these glaives that come out, and they do some attack damage. And this is good for, obviously, in a defensive stance, if you start, like, manning up on somebody or get initiated on. But obviously, if you are aggressive as well and you're fighting a melee hero, this can be really good for doing damage. It can be helpful for farming, but not really that much, because you're going to mainly be farming with Moon Glaives here. And you can see when I start right-clicking this axe, it bounces to this other one, and they keep bouncing back and forth a bunch. So if I stop here, you can see they're still bouncing. And with every level, you get more bounces and you get more damage on these glaives. And this is why this hero can be such a good hero at just shredding buildings and pushing the base extremely fast, because there's a bunch of buildings in there for these glaives to bounce off of, and she will just melt the enemy base. If you're far ahead and if you have the opportunity to right-click for a few minutes, that racks will be completely gone. And so that's also how she's able to farm and push extremely quickly. And then lastly, we have Eclipse. This is a pretty straightforward ability as well. You just kind of click it. It's a big ultimate that does a lot of magic damage, but it kind of works in combo with your Lucent Beam. So if you, let's say, have 2 points in this at level 2, but you for some reason only had 1 point in Lucent Beam, it's actually not going to do that much damage. So you sort of have to have points in the Lucent Beam in order to make this Eclipse effective. So let me just show you how this works. You just press it, and then it hits enemies in this AoE with a bunch of Lucent Beams. But you have to understand, it didn't kill any of these axes, because there's only a limited number of hits it can do per unit. So it's not like if, let's say, there's one unit, you're going to hit every single beam on that unit. So just be keeping that in mind when you do go to try to like solo kill somebody, especially like level 1, because it's really not going to be that strong, especially if you don't have max Lucent Beam. So keep that in mind. It is a combination thing, and it does limit the amount of beams that can hit one enemy until you get your Ag Scepter, which this really buffs up this Eclipse. So let's just show you the difference. Honestly, you can do it in an AoE. You don't even have to cast it around yourself. You could see that Eclipse was sort of, I just pressed it and then it happened in this AoE around you. Now with Ags, you can cast it anywhere you want and it hits a bunch more. It's like insane. So there's a lot more beams and it's really not limited to how many can hit each axe. So we actually kind of got lucky there, or a little bit unlucky, I guess, because no axe died. Let's just try it again and see what happens. So you see there, it just kind of hit this axe a bunch, and so it's not just always hitting the same target or choosing targets differently. Sometimes it will just choose the one target a bunch, so it's a little bit random in that sense. But it can obviously amp up your magic damage a ton. You can cast it from afar. It doesn't have to be right around you. This is really, really good late game, and you can kind of see how this hero could be effective getting Refresher and Ags, and then just being a super insane magic damage dealing hero, and not just about the right clicks, although your right clicks are going to be very effective. And then Shard, for now, it's been changed a few times. It might get changed in the future. Just keep that in mind. This basically just increases Lunar Orbit's ability to just do more damage. So you can see when I have this, it's just going a little bit faster, it's doing a little bit more damage, and obviously if you pick the facet that gives you defensive capabilities, this can be very, very good for that as well. So those are Luna's abilities. Now let's jump into a game and see how she's played. Now, Luna's laning stage is really all about using Beam to secure last hits or harass the enemy, and depending on the patch or how strong Lucent Beam is, you may choose to put more points into that ability to snowball your laning stage, especially if you have an aggressive support. Now, in the past, this was more of a consideration because you used to have to put points into Lunar Blessing and your Glaives, and then you didn't really want to put points into Beam, but now you can pretty much just put points into Beam and Glaives and then save that third ability for later. But depending on the patch, depending on the balance, you may not want to put a bunch of points in Beam if you're really not going to be using it early on. You might just want one or two maximum, especially because you're not going to want to get a lot of, mana items or mana regen items, because the main thing this hero focuses on is just lifesteal at the very least to farm. So it's just a little bit of a consideration for that, but for the most part you're going to be farming using Lunar Beam to just get last hits and harass, and that's pretty much the basics of the laning stage for the hero. Then transitioning out of the laning stage, Luna is a really farm-heavy hero, so you want to make that transition as soon as possible to just go to the jungle and push out the wave, that kind of thing, maybe farming stacks really early, and at most you would need the Mask of Death for that Mask of Madness, and sometimes you don't even need that. And that's really the main consideration of when do you really transition out of just laning to pushing the lane and then going to the jungle. And then the other consideration in that kind of transitionary period is, do you just farm all of the camps and the wave around your tower where you laned, or do you switch to the other side of the map to start farming ancients? And that has a lot to do with, were the ancients stacked? Was your tower taken? Do you feel safe on that side of the map? All those kinds of things, because she's such a good ancient farmer that you want to make sure that you're putting that into your farming pattern, at least to some extent, at some point in the game. You don't just want to have those ancients sitting there not being farmed. That also has a consideration of, can your offlaner or your mid farm those ancients? That's also a little bit of a consideration. If they're already doing it, maybe you don't need to move to that side of the map as quickly or as early. But if nobody can do them, you really want to make sure you're doing them, because Luna is just so good at doing those ancients. Then for the mid game, although you do want to focus on farming, Luna can be a decent hero early on, getting solo kills, getting pick-offs, pushing towers, because she has that magic damage component. Her ultimate can be a good teamfight ultimate, can be a good magic damage ultimate early on. So with Lunar Beam and with Eclipse, combining that, it doesn't mean that she can just sit in the jungle, Even though she's kind of similar to a Medusa, Medusa doesn't really do much early on, Her ultimate is all about getting out of jail for free by pressing it and running away. That's not what Luna does. She can participate a little bit. You just want to make sure that you're not participating in a way that's kind of really reducing your farm, because she does love to be an item or two ahead, like I've said. So then the main timing for this hero is once you get about 3 or 4 items, that's really your time to shine, because you can get those items extremely quickly, and then if you can get a Roche, participate in team fights, and start pushing base if you are ahead, that is really your time to shine, because you will just melt the enemy base before they really have the tools to deal with you. And that's really going to be what your focus is. But keep in mind, you aren't just all in on that strategy. If you're, not having a good game, or your team's not having a good game, if you are falling behind, that's okay. okay as long as you're able to keep your farm up, because then in the later portion of the game, if it gets to that point, like I've said before, you can get Ag's Refresher, you can do a lot of things to make sure that you're not falling off as a carry compared to some other carries who fall off after their timing around 30 minutes or whatever, a lot of those other fast farming carries like I've talked about in other guides. Then lastly, in terms of how you actually play team fights, Luna is a hero where you can be sort of a frontline hero, especially if you have BKB or Aegis. You can kind of just sit in the front, right click, and force the enemy to go on you, because you obviously have a pretty short attack range, and then you also have your abilities that kind of have an AoE around you, so you don't want to really be doing anything from super long range. But at the same time, you do have Lunar Beam, and you can kind of poke at the enemy. And sometimes if you don't have Aegis, or, you know, it's really late in the game, and you have like level 25, or you have these other abilities, you have Ags or something like that, sometimes you don't really just want to be in the front of the enemy and have them go on you, because you want to poke and prod, you want to pick your positions, pick your fights, pick your heroes that you're engaging with, just depending on the matchups. And that's really how you want to think about team fights is, do you have the tools and the resources necessary to frontline? If not, you kind of want to play the back and just kind of pick and choose when you go in and let your teammates initiate or let the enemy initiate and then counter initiate onto them. That's really how you need to think about fights with Luna. So overall, Luna is a super fast farmer. That's what you're going to focus on in the early game, then hit these item timings that, you know, the enemy can't really deal with. And then late game, you are a big threat. If you do get to that late game portion, you can buy Divine Rapier, Ag's Refresher, all those kinds of things. You can do an insane amount of damage. And this hero doesn't really have a point where it super falls off. Now, it's not going to man fight some other heroes like some carries really focus on doing, but you don't necessarily need to do that because you can poke and prod like I talked about. So that is my Luna guide, everyone. I hope you liked the video and found it helpful, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.